My son told me to stop pretending I matter, but his boss had questions he couldn't answer. I never thought the boy I raised alone would be the one to destroy me, but that family dinner proved me wrong in the cruelest way possible. The fork clattered against my plate as Ryan's words cut through the dining room. Stop pretending you matter, Dad. You're just wasting space. My son's voice was cold, deliberate, and loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. His wife smirked beside him while my brother and sister-in-law stared at their food in uncomfortable silence. I'd raised this boy alone after my wife died when he was 8, worked double shifts at the engineering firm, skipped promotions to attend his school events, paid every cent of his college tuition. Now, at 28, he sat across from me acting like I was invisible. The roast chicken I'd brought suddenly felt heavy in my stomach. I wanted to scream, to defend myself, to remind him of everything I'd sacrificed. Instead, I just nodded slowly, excused myself quietly, and walked out into the cold night air. But something had shifted inside me, something dark and determined that wouldn't let this stand. The humiliation continued the next morning at Ryan's office. I'd been consulting there occasionally, helping with complex engineering projects that required my 30 years of experience. As I walked toward the conference room, I heard Ryan's voice echoing down the hallway. My dad still uses methods from the Stone Age, he laughed to his colleagues. Honestly, he's dead weight. I only keep him around because I feel sorry for him. The words hit me like physical blows. I stood frozen outside the door, watching through the glass as my son mocked everything I'd taught him. His coworkers laughed uncomfortably, clearly unsure how to respond. Then Ryan spotted me standing there. Our eyes met for just a second, and instead of shame or apology, I saw only irritation cross his face. He turned back to his presentation as if I didn't exist. I walked into that meeting with my head high, but inside, I was breaking into pieces that I'd have to figure out how to reassemble later. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, memories flooding back like a dam had burst. I remembered Ryan at 10 years old, crying because he couldn't understand his math homework. I'd spent 3 hours patiently explaining fractions until he finally got it. I remembered turning down a promotion that would have required relocating, because Ryan's therapist said stability was crucial after losing his mother. I remembered working weekends to pay for his engineering degree, the same degree he now used to belittle me. I'd given up relationships, opportunities, and my own dreams to make sure Ryan had everything he needed. I'd even used my connections to get him his current job at Callahan Engineering, calling in favors from old friends who respected my work. And this was my reward: public humiliation and private contempt. The anger that had been simmering since dinner finally crystallized into something harder and colder. Maybe it was time Ryan learned where his success really came from. If you're enjoying this story so far, please take a moment to like this story and also hit the subscribe button to get notified of our new series. 3 days later, I arrived early at the office for a project review meeting. I was sitting in the break room when I heard Ryan's voice from around the corner, bragging to a group of junior engineers. Honestly, my dad's just a washed-up has-been, he said casually, like he was discussing the weather. I only keep him around to make him feel useful. It's kind of sad, really. He thinks he's contributing, but everything he suggests is outdated garbage. Someone asked if I'd helped with his recent award-winning design. Ryan laughed. That was all me. Dad might have glanced at it, but the innovation was entirely mine. I felt my hands curl into fists. That award-winning design had been 70% my work. I'd spent 2 weeks fixing Ryan's calculations and restructuring his entire approach. But I'd let him take the credit because I thought I was helping my son succeed. Now I understood the truth. I wasn't helping him succeed. I was enabling him to become someone I barely recognized. The final straw came that evening when Ryan stopped by my apartment. He didn't knock, just used his key and walked in like he owned the place. "We need to talk," he said, not even bothering to sit down. His tone was cold, businesslike. "You're making me look bad at work, Dad. Everyone knows you're my father, and when you're there, people think I can't handle things on my own." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, some sign he was joking. But his face was serious, almost annoyed. "You don't matter anymore," he continued flatly. Your methods are outdated, your ideas are ancient, and frankly, you're an embarrassment. Stay out of my career. The words hung in the air between us like poison. This was my son, the boy I'd sacrificed everything for, telling me I was worthless. Get out, I said quietly. He looked almost relieved as he left. I sat in the dark for hours after he was gone, feeling something fundamental break inside me. But from that broken place, something new was growing, resolve. I didn't yell, didn't threaten, didn't make dramatic pronouncements. Instead, I did what I'd always done best. I planned carefully and thoroughly. The next morning, I started a new file on my computer labeled Project Documentation. I began going through every project Ryan had worked on in the past 3 years, every report he'd submitted, every presentation he'd given. And I documented every single mistake I'd quietly fixed, every calculation I'd corrected, every design flaw I'd caught before it became a disaster. The evidence was damning. Ryan's actual work was sloppy, cutting corners on safety protocols and using outdated formulas that could cause serious structural problems. I'd been so focused on protecting him, on making sure he succeeded, that I'd never forced him to actually learn how to do the work properly. Now those shortcuts were documented in excruciating detail, time-stamped and saved in multiple locations. I wasn't sure yet what I'd do with this information, but having it felt like holding insurance against whatever came next. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing things I'd missed before. Mr. Callahan, Ryan's boss and my old friend, would watch Ryan during meetings with an expression that wasn't quite skepticism but wasn't quite confidence either. I realized that Callahan had probably been noticing the same things I had: Ryan's vague answers when pressed for technical details, his tendency to deflect questions with corporate jargon, the way he'd glance at me whenever something complicated came up. One afternoon, Callahan stopped me in the parking lot. "Your son's doing well," he said carefully, but there was a question in his voice. I just smiled. "He's ambitious, that's for sure." Callahan's eyes narrowed slightly. "Ambition is important, but so is substance. Behind every one of his praised reports, you've been consulting, haven't you?" It wasn't really a question. I shrugged non-committally. "I'm just here to help where I can." He nodded slowly, filing that information away. Seeds of doubt, I thought, were best planted subtly and allowed to grow naturally. The harvest would come later. 2 weeks later, I made my first deliberate move. Ryan had a major presentation on a transportation infrastructure project, and as usual, he'd asked me to take a quick look at his calculations. I reviewed them carefully and found what I expected: critical errors in the load distribution formulas that would cause serious problems. Normally, I would have fixed them quietly. This time, I didn't. Instead, I told Ryan everything looked good and wished him luck. The presentation started well enough. Ryan was confident, charming, presenting complex information with the polish of someone who'd done this 100 times. Then the questions started. "Can you explain the algorithm behind the stress calculations on slide 12? One of the senior engineers asked. I watched Ryan's face carefully. A flicker of panic crossed his features before he recovered. "It's based on standard industry protocols with some proprietary modifications," he said vaguely. The engineer frowned. "But these numbers don't match standard protocols. The coefficient here is wrong." Ryan stumbled, his confidence cracking visibly. I sat quietly in the back, watching the first domino wobble. After the meeting, Callahan caught up with me in the hallway. His face was thoughtful, concerned. "Can I ask you something off the record?" he said, guiding me into an empty office. "Did Ryan actually prepare that presentation himself?" The question hung in the air, loaded with implications. I could have lied, could have protected my son one more time. Instead, I met Callahan's eyes and smiled slightly. "Why don't you ask him?" Callahan studied my face for a long moment. "I've been asking myself why one of the best engineers I've ever worked with is content to stay in the background while his son takes all the credit. Now I'm starting to wonder if that's really what's been happening." He paused. "Or if something else entirely is going on." I didn't confirm or deny anything. Ryan's a grown man making his own choices. I'm just here as a consultant. Callahan nodded slowly. A consultant who seems to be the only one who actually knows how the work gets done. He walked away, leaving me with the distinct impression that my seeds of doubt had found very fertile soil. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss what happens next in this incredible journey of justice. That evening, Ryan stormed into my apartment without knocking, his face red with fury. "What did you say to Callahan?" he demanded. "You're sabotaging me. You deliberately didn't fix those errors because you're jealous." His accusation was so absurd I almost laughed. "Jealous? Of what, exactly?" I asked calmly. "Of the fact that you're more successful than I ever was," he shouted. "You can't stand that I've surpassed you, that I'm everything you failed to be." The delusion in his words was staggering. He actually believed his own lies, had convinced himself that his success was entirely his own. "You told me to stay out of your career," I reminded him quietly. "You said I was outdated and irrelevant. So I did what you asked. I stepped back and let you handle things yourself." His face went from red to purple. "You know what I meant. You're supposed to support me, not let me fail." I stood up slowly, tired of this conversation. "Get out, Ryan. If you're as brilliant as you claim, you don't need me anyway." He left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. I sat back down and opened my documentation file, adding notes about today's meeting. The plan was working perfectly. While Ryan scrambled to repair his damaged reputation, I quietly began rebuilding my own professional network. I reached out to former colleagues, people I'd worked with before I'd scaled back my career to focus on raising Ryan. The responses were immediate and enthusiastic. "We've missed your expertise," my old supervisor at Morrison Engineering told me over coffee. "We'd love to have you back in any capacity." I met with 3 different firms over the next 2 weeks, each one eager to discuss opportunities. They knew my work, respected my skills, and weren't interested in the office politics that had allowed Ryan to take credit for my projects. I was careful to keep these meetings secret. Ryan couldn't know I was building an exit strategy, creating options for myself outside his sphere. At the same time, I continued documenting everything at Callahan Engineering. Not just Ryan's mistakes, but also my own contributions, time-stamped and saved in multiple secure locations. When the time came to reveal the truth, I'd have irrefutable evidence ready. The pieces were falling into place beautifully. 3 months into my quiet campaign, I had everything I needed. My evidence folder was comprehensive and damning. Every email where I'd sent Ryan corrections, with timestamps showing they'd been sent hours before his submissions. Every project file showing my original calculations compared to his modified versions. Every safety protocol he'd violated, every corner he'd cut, every deadline he'd missed that I'd quietly salvaged. I had budget reports showing where his negligence had cost the company money, only to be fixed by mysterious corrections that Ryan never acknowledged. I had witness statements from junior engineers who'd seen me working late on Ryan's projects. I even had recordings of conversations where Ryan had explicitly asked for my help and then presented the work as entirely his own. But I kept this folder locked away, waiting. The right moment hadn't arrived yet. I needed Ryan to feel completely secure in his position, confident that his lies were unshakable. Only then would the fall be devastating enough. Patience had always been my greatest strength as an engineer. Measure twice, cut once. I was still in the measuring phase. The moment I'd been waiting for arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Callahan called me into his office, closing the door carefully behind us. His face was serious, troubled. "I need to ask you something, and I need complete honesty," he said, sitting across from me. "How much of Ryan's work have you actually been doing?" The question was direct, unavoidable. I could deflect, could continue protecting Ryan, or I could finally tell the truth. I took a deep breath. A significant amount of it. Not all Ryan does have skills, but the projects that have won awards, the innovations that got him promoted, the calculations that saved the company millions, those were largely mine. Callahan closed his eyes briefly. "Why didn't you say something sooner? Why let him take credit?" The answer was complicated, painful. Because he's my son, and I thought I was helping him build a career. I thought he'd eventually learn, grow into the role. I was wrong. Callahan leaned forward. I've been reviewing files. I found inconsistencies, timeline problems. I need proof, documentation. I met his eyes steadily. I have everything you need. That evening, I sat in my apartment with my evidence folder open on my laptop, my phone in my hand, ready to send everything to Callahan. My finger hovered over the button. One click and Ryan's career would implode. One click and the truth would finally come out. But he was still my son. Despite everything he'd said, every way he'd hurt me, some part of me hesitated. I thought about his mother, my wife, and what she would have wanted. She'd loved Ryan so much, had made me promise before she died to always take care of him. Was destroying his career really taking care of him? Or was allowing him to continue living a lie the greater betrayal? I closed the laptop without sending anything. Not yet, I whispered to the empty room. I called Callahan and asked for more time. I want to give Ryan one more chance to come clean on his own. If he confesses, admits what he's done, I'll help him through the consequences. But if he doubles down on his lies, I left the sentence unfinished. Callahan agreed reluctantly to wait 1 week. I'd give my son 7 days to choose the man he wanted to be. I invited Ryan to dinner at a quiet restaurant, hoping neutral ground might help him hear what I had to say. He arrived 20 minutes late, already annoyed. "What's this about?" he asked, not even looking at the menu. "I'm busy." I took a deep breath, trying one last time to reach the boy I'd raised. "Ryan, I know about all the projects. I have documentation of everything, every correction I made, every calculation you presented as your own." Callahan is asking questions. This is your chance to get ahead of it, to come clean before everything collapses. I expected shock, maybe fear, perhaps even relief. Instead, Ryan's face hardened into cold fury. "Are you threatening me?" he hissed. "After everything you've done to embarrass me, now you're trying to blackmail me?" He leaned across the table, his voice low and vicious. "Here's what's going to happen, Dad. You're going to quit the company. Tell them you're retiring, getting too old, whatever excuse you want. If you don't, if you stay and keep trying to claim credit for my work, I'll make sure everyone knows you're a bitter, washed-up failure trying to ride your son's success." He stood up. "You have until Monday to resign, or I'll make your life hell." He walked out, leaving me sitting there in stunned silence. My last hope had just died, and with it, any remaining mercy I might have shown him. This is getting intense. Subscribe now to see how this unfolds. Something cold and final settled in my chest after that dinner. I'd given Ryan every opportunity to choose differently, to show even a shred of the decency I'd tried to instill in him. He'd chosen arrogance, threats, and cruelty instead. Fine. If he wanted to play this game, I'd show him what 3 decades of engineering precision looked like when applied to revenge. I wasn't doing this just for myself anymore. I was doing it for every parent who'd sacrificed everything for their child only to be tossed aside. For every mentor who'd been used and discarded. For every person who'd been stolen from by someone they trusted. I called Callahan that night. "I'm ready to provide the documentation, but I want to do this strategically. Ryan needs to be exposed publicly, completely, in a way that leaves no room for excuses or spin." Callahan was quiet for a moment. "What do you have in mind?" I outlined my plan. It would take 4 weeks to set up perfectly, but the payoff would be devastating. Callahan listened, and when I finished, he simply said, "Let's do it." The countdown had begun. The next 4 weeks were a masterclass in strategic planning. First, I identified one last major project, a municipal bridge redesign worth $5 million to the company. I took on the technical work myself, documenting every step, making sure my name and timestamps were on every file. The design was brilliant, innovative, incorporating new sustainable materials that would save the city money over decades. I registered it officially under my name with the company's documentation system. Then I identified Ryan's next big presentation, a transportation hub proposal he'd been working on for weeks. I'd watched him build it, seen every shortcut he'd taken, every calculation he'd bungled. This time I offered no help, no corrections, no safety net. I also quietly met with senior staff members I'd worked with for years. Just so you know, I told each of them privately, questions are being raised about project attributions. If anyone asks, I have comprehensive documentation of my work. They understood immediately. When the truth came out, I'd have credible witnesses ready to confirm my story. The leak happened on a Friday morning, timed perfectly for maximum impact. A confidential file appeared on Callahan's desk, comparing Ryan's submitted projects with my original work from years earlier. The similarities weren't just striking, they were identical. Design specifications, calculation methodologies, even specific phrasing in technical explanations matched word for word. One particular innovation Ryan had presented at a national engineering conference, an algorithm for optimizing traffic flow, was directly lifted from a paper I'd published in an industry journal 7 years ago. The paper had been overlooked at the time, but now it was damning evidence. Callahan called an emergency meeting with HR and the legal team. I received a call from his assistant that afternoon. Mr. Callahan needs to see you Monday morning, along with Ryan. Please bring any documentation you have regarding project work over the past 3 years. The formal tone told me everything. The wheels of justice were finally turning, and they were about to crush my son beneath them. I felt no joy, only grim satisfaction that the truth was finally surfacing. Monday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. Callahan summoned Ryan to his office with HR present. I was asked to wait outside initially. Through the door, I could hear Ryan's voice rising in pitch as Callahan laid out the evidence. These are just coincidences, Ryan insisted. Similar approaches to common problems. Every engineer learns the same basics. But Callahan wasn't buying it. These aren't basics, Ryan. These are unique, innovative solutions to complex problems. Solutions that your father documented years before you presented them as your own work. The silence that followed was heavy. Then Ryan tried a different tack. My father helped me, yes. He was my mentor. But the final implementations, the real innovations, those were mine. Callahan's response was icy. Then you'll have no problem providing your original work files. The preliminary calculations, the development process, the iterations that led to your final designs. More silence. I'll need to gather those, Ryan finally said weakly. They're on my home computer. You have until Wednesday, Callahan replied. Bring everything. I knew Ryan couldn't produce what didn't exist. The trap was closing. Wednesday arrived, and with it, the critical investor meeting for Ryan's transportation hub proposal. This was the presentation Ryan had built entirely on his own, the one I'd deliberately left alone despite seeing its fatal flaws. 20 investors sat in the conference room, representing millions in potential funding. Ryan stood at the front, confident as ever despite the investigation hanging over his head. For the first 40 minutes, everything seemed fine. Ryan's charm was on full display, his presentation polished and professional. The investors nodded along, seemingly impressed. Then came the technical demonstration. A computer simulation of how the transportation hub would handle peak traffic loads. Ryan clicked the button to start the simulation. The screen flickered. Numbers began populating on the display, traffic flow algorithms running in real time. Then suddenly, everything froze. Error messages cascaded across the screen. The simulation crashed completely, displaying a critical failure in the load calculation subroutines. An investor leaned forward. What just happened? Ryan's face went pale. Just a minor technical glitch, he stammered, frantically clicking buttons. But the system wouldn't restart. The crash had been caused by fundamental errors in his coding. Errors I'd seen weeks ago but chosen not to mention. The investors exchanged glances. Callahan's face was stone. Ryan's carefully constructed image was crumbling in real time. Callahan stood up slowly, his voice cutting through the awkward silence. Ryan, if this was your work, can you explain the algorithm structure that just failed? The question hung in the air like an executioner's blade. Ryan's mouth opened, closed, opened again. It's based on standard pathfinding algorithms with modifications for traffic density, he managed. Callahan shook his head. That's not what I asked. Explain the specific structure of your code. Walk us through the decision tree. Dead silence. Ryan stood there, frozen, his face cycling through panic, confusion, and finally, desperate anger. I don't need to justify my work to. Yes, you do, Callahan interrupted coldly. Especially when this company is about to invest $5 million based on your supposed expertise. He gestured to the crashed simulation. This failure suggests fundamental problems with your technical understanding. So explain it. Now. Ryan looked around the room, perhaps hoping someone would rescue him. His eyes landed on me, sitting quietly in the back. For just a moment, I saw the same little boy who used to come to me with his impossible homework problems. Then his face hardened with resentment. The algorithm is complex. I'd need time to. You don't know, Callahan said flatly. You don't know because you didn't write it. The accusation hung in the air, undeniable and damning. Like this story? Hit that subscribe button to see justice finally served. I stood up slowly, every eye in the room turning toward me. Perhaps I can explain, I said quietly. After all, I wrote it. The gasps were audible. Ryan's face went from pale to red to ashen gray in seconds. Dad, don't, he started. But Callahan raised a hand for silence. Please, continue. I walked to the front of the room, not looking at my son. The algorithm uses a modified Dijkstra approach with real-time weighting based on traffic density, weather conditions, and historical patterns. The decision tree branches at 7 primary nodes, each with subcalculations for optimization. I pulled up the code on the still frozen screen, pointing to specific sections. This error here in line 47 is a variable mismatch. The calculation calls for density_factor, but the earlier loop defines it as traffic_density. A simple oversight, but fatal to the simulation. I turned to face the room. I could fix this in about 10 minutes. But I didn't write this particular code. My son did, using pieces of my earlier work but modifying them without fully understanding the underlying mathematics. The investors stared. Callahan's expression was unreadable. Ryan stood frozen, his career ending in slow motion. The question you should all be asking, I continued, is how many other projects have this same problem? Work presented as Ryan's that was actually mine, or work Ryan attempted himself that contains fundamental errors? Callahan walked to his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. I think it's time we laid everything on the table. He spread documents across the conference table. My emails to Ryan with corrections, timestamp files showing my original work predating Ryan's submissions, witness statements from junior engineers. Over the past 3 years, Callahan said, his voice hard, Ryan has presented approximately 40 projects as his own work. Of those 40, we can now prove that at least 32 were substantially or entirely completed by his father, who asked for no credit and received none. He looked at Ryan with something like disgust. The remaining 8 projects, the ones Ryan actually did himself, contain an average of 14 critical errors each. Errors that could have cost this company millions in lawsuits and corrections. An investor spoke up. Did you know about this? She asked me directly. I met her eyes honestly. Yes, I thought I was helping my son build a career. I thought he'd learn, grow into the role. Instead, he learned to take credit for others' work and developed contempt for the person who'd sacrificed everything for him. Ryan finally found his voice. You're doing this because I told you to quit. This is revenge. I shook my head sadly. No, son. This is consequence. There's a difference. Callahan gestured for Ryan to sit down. Ryan, you're fired. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out after this meeting. Ryan's face crumbled. You can't do this. I'll sue. You'll do nothing, Callahan interrupted. Because if you make any attempt to fight this, we'll release every piece of evidence publicly. Your reputation in this industry will be destroyed. Take your termination quietly, and you might be able to rebuild somewhere else. Eventually, the investors were already packing up their materials, the meeting clearly over. As they filed out, several stopped to shake my hand, introducing themselves and expressing interest in my actual work. Ryan sat motionless, staring at the table. Finally, he looked up at me. "How could you do this to me?" he whispered. The question was so absurd I almost laughed. "I didn't do this to you, Ryan. You did this to yourself. I gave you every opportunity to come clean, to show even a shred of integrity. You chose arrogance and cruelty instead." I stood up, gathering my materials. "Respect is earned, son, not stolen. Maybe someday you'll understand that." Security arrived to escort him out. I watched him walk away, shoulders slumped, carrying a box of his personal belongings. I felt no triumph, no joy, just a quiet, sad certainty that this had been necessary. 2 days later, Callahan called me into his office. "The board met yesterday," he said. "We'd like to offer you Ryan's former position as senior project manager. Full benefits, significant raise, and most importantly, proper credit for your work." I sat quietly, considering. Part of me wanted to refuse, to walk away from this place that held so many painful memories. But another part, the part that had worked 3 decades to build expertise and knowledge, wanted vindication. "I accept," I said finally. "Not to replace my son, not as revenge, but because I've earned it." Callahan smiled. "You have more than earned it." Over the next few weeks, I settled into my new role. The bridge redesign I'd completed was approved with full recognition of my work. My name went on patents, on publications, in company materials. Junior engineers sought my mentorship and I gave it freely, but with clear expectations about honesty and credit. As for Ryan, I heard through the grapevine that he'd moved to another city, taken a junior position at a smaller firm. Maybe he was learning humility, maybe not. That was his journey now, not mine. I walked out of the office each evening with my head high, my reputation restored, and my dignity intact. It wasn't sweet revenge. It was simply justice, quiet and complete.